Hello there. Welcome to Planet America's Weekend Edition. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello.
This week, outcry over the White House picking and choosing the reporters who can cover Trump, and remembering the Secret Service agent who tried to save JFK.
Also this week, we're going to be looking at the impact Elon Musk's DOGE is having on the budget bottom line, and it is not as big as you might think. But first...
President Trump held his first cabinet meeting yesterday in week 6 of his second term. Selected members of the press were also invited in for the first hour or so when the discussion was dominated by somebody who isn't actually in cabinet, Elon Musk, the presidential advisor charged with heading the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Musk tried to explain this week's email as well. It was the one sent to federal workers, which demanded that they explain what they're working on or face being sacked. Some cabinet officials pushed back on that email, and it created the first evidence this week of perhaps discontent and dissent within administration ranks.
But what we are trying to get to the bottom of is we think there are a number of people on the government payroll who are dead, which is probably why they can't respond, and some people who are not real people, like they're literally fictional individuals that are collecting paychecks. Well, somebody's collecting paychecks on a fictional individual, so we're just literally trying to figure out, are these people real? Are they alive? And can they write an email? Which I think is a reasonable expectation for the American public would have at least that expectation of someone in the public sector.
Interesting explanation of the whole controversy. After Musk spoke, a reporter asked about some reports that have been coming through this week that cabinet officials are unhappy with the way that DOGE is going around, making sweeping cuts and layoffs and closures across the federal government. President Trump's response to that question, and then the response of cabinet, and then the response of Elon Musk kind of sucking up at the end, was all fascinating.
Is anybody unhappy with Elon? If you are, well, throw them out of here. Is anybody unhappy? They have a lot of respect for Elon and that he's doing this, and some disagree a little bit, but I will tell you, for the most part, I think everyone's not only happy, they're thrilled. So go ahead, Elon.
And President Trump has put together, I think, the best cabinet ever. Literally. So, and I do not give false praise. This is an incredible group of people. I don't think that such a talented team has actually ever been assembled. I think it's literally the best cabinet that the country has ever had. And I think the company should be incredibly appreciative of the people in this room.
Interestingly, neither Musk nor Trump would put a figure on the number of federal employees they ultimately intend on sacking. At one point, Trump started talking about 65% of Environment Protection Agency workers being axed, but later the White House walked that back, corrected it, saying, no, that's the target for overall budget savings, not personnel reductions. Trump also said that around 2 million of the 3 million strong federal workforce who got that Musk email had responded. But he then said that the remaining million, well, they're now facing an uncertain future, if indeed they even exist.
I'd like to add that those million people that haven't responded, though, Elon, they are on the bubble. You know, I wouldn't say that we're thrilled about it. You know, they haven't responded. Now, maybe they don't exist. Maybe we're paying people that don't exist. Don't forget, we just got here. This group just got here. But those people are on the bubble, as they say. You know, maybe they're going to be gone. Maybe they're not around. Maybe they have other jobs. Maybe they moved and they're not where they're supposed to be. A lot of things could have happened.
This is all getting a little bit strange. They're basically now peddling a conspiracy theory that there are fake federal workers on the payroll. It seemed to feel like those claims back during the election that Trump kept saying that dead people are voting for Democrats. That's why he's not winning the popular vote. We'll soon see if there's any evidence, of course, for all of this. But with all these claims of waste, fraud and abuse, it also seems that that's a little bit flimsy as well. It seems that we're seeing very real-world evidence of what happens when you make these cuts. Musk apologised to members of Cabinet saying, look, we're moving with such speed, we're going to make mistakes. Like, we cancelled the whole Ebola prevention program, but we quickly reinstated that. Experts then turned around and said, no, you haven't. In fact, you've basically, all the pandemic prevention programs have been chopped along with USAID. So it does seem there is a lot of chaos and confusion and possibly not a lot of actual budget savings.
I agree. Look, first of all, there's a lot to respond to here. The first thing is, I just don't buy for a second that they were trying to investigate whether there were fraudulent people with fictional paychecks in the federal workforce. Musk did a very similar thing to his engineers when he took over Twitter. Same kind of thing.
Right.
Send me an email saying what you've done in the past. So this is a trick he likes to pull. There was no concerns about fictional engineers in Twitter.
Right.
So I just think it blew up.
And he
in his
ultimately
face.
sacked 80% of Twitter's workforce.
Yeah, but not because of that email, right? So I think he was just trying to justify it when it blew up in his face. Also, if you think about it, it doesn't make any sense, that explanation. If you're a fraudulent person who's got a fictional account,
Yes.
you have access to the email.
Of course, you'd be saying, yes, well, here's what I did last week. I was terribly busy.
Totally. And if you were trying to catch them out, why would you announce it and publicise it on Twitter?
Yeah.
Because that's just telling them what to do. Like, that doesn't make any sense at all. And also, from an efficiency point of view, I don't want to be a smarty, but they're supposed to be efficiency people. Do you really want your people checking their email constantly and checking Twitter for instructions? That's not efficiency. So none of this really makes sense to me at all. What I'm much more concerned, do you have anything to add to that before I go into the budget? Because I'm more concerned with the budget.
Yeah, well, the only thing I would note from watching that first hour that was televised of the cabinet meeting was the way in which all of the other cabinet members are sitting back. They wouldn't pipe up when Trump said, now here's some of you who've got a problem with Elon. Anybody want to say anything about it now? Okay, fine, everyone loves Elon. Moving on. But it was clear that, you know, you look at the body language of various ones, you know, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is there like this and, you know, grudgingly, like, you know. They're prepared for Elon Musk to take the hit on this because if Musk is seen as the baddie, they get their budgets trimmed, their workforces trimmed. They don't take the political flak for it. And bear in mind, at least 4 members of Trump's cabinet have run for president themselves in the past and may well want to run for president again in the future. So they're happy to keep their hands clean. And Elon Musk, of course, whether this blows up in a month or a year from now, he'll walk away because he's got plenty else to do.
Absolutely. On that note, by the way, with the cabinet, before I move to the budget, I need to give credit where it's due. The 3 people who first pushed back against Elon Musk's email and said, no, you don't need to jump through hoops. We'll decide our department who gets sacked and who doesn't. Those 3 people were Pete Hegseth, Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard, generally thought to be, by the press, the 3 biggest
loosest
hacks.
cannons.
Yeah, absolutely. And they turned out to be the 3 people who stood firmest for their staff. So I'll give them credit for that.
Well, they don't want spies saying, here are the 5 things I did last week. Well, I trailed a Russian.
Well, whatever the reason, I just think now they're actually in positions of power. We should give them a chance and see what they do, because that first hit out was positive from them. Now to the budget. While DOGE is sending out ridiculous emails, and what they're not doing is worrying about the budget. It's a serious issue. The budget deficit last year was like, what, 1.6 trillion, 1.7 trillion? That's an entire Australia we're talking about. It's just the deficit. The deficit. Right? They're paying now in interest more than the entire defence budget, and that's only increasing. There's a huge issue. Now, let's look at what DOGE has actually done. They claim, Trump, we just played him claiming $55 billion of savings in the first month. Now, we're about to go into, with our guest, how there was not $55 billion of savings, but let's just pretend there was. Let's just take them at their word. That's still half the rate they need to go to eliminate the deficit in 18 months. And this is the low-hanging fruit. This was the first month. And they still...
Yeah, looking for workers that don't exist.
Yeah, that's right. And so DOGE is not doing what they're meant to be doing, what they need to be doing. America has a massive problem with that budget. And if you just look at what happened just this week, the House passed a resolution for the budget, not the budget. It's like the skeleton that they're going to put the budget in. You look at that skeleton, and they've got $1.5 to $2 trillion of cuts, none of which they spelt out because they were too scared to spell out because they knew it would blow up in their face if they said what they were going to be, number one. Number two, $4.5 trillion of tax cuts. If that budget resolution actually turned into a budget, the deficit's going to blow out by another $2.5 trillion. And those are the guys who supposedly care about cutting spending and all the rest of it. So they've got a massive problem over there.
Yeah, it does feel like smoke and mirrors to justify the tax cut, which is going to happen. There's no doubt about that. But for more, we did speak to one of America's leading budget economists, Jessica Riedl, who has been a top economic advisor to Republican senators and presidential candidates, including Mitt Romney and Marco Rubio. These days, Jessica is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute.
Yeah, and I began by asking her assessment of the budget bill that was just passed by House Republicans this week.
Well, right now, the House budget bill looks like it's going to add a lot more debt. The United States is already projected to run $20 trillion in new deficits over the next decade. And this bill cuts taxes by $4.5 trillion more over the decade. It does call for $1.2 trillion in spending cuts. I don't think Congress can pass them. So I'm worried that this could push it up to about $25 trillion in borrowing over the next decade, which will push budget deficits up towards 7-8% of GDP, even during peace and prosperity. I would like to see a lot more restraint.
Now, Republicans have heard your concerns, Jessica, and they don't care because they say the budget is going to reduce the deficit through supercharged growth. Do you think they're right?
This is an old gimmick. The Republican budget assumes that the day this budget is implemented, on October 1st, the productivity rate in America will immediately double that day and stay at the higher productivity growth rate forever. I hope they're right. There is no basis to suggest that that will happen. And using that assumed revenue and already spending it is kind of like buying a house you can't afford on the hope that next year you'll get your pay doubled in order to pay for it. It's a gimmick.
And Jessica, can we get your thoughts on DOGE and their efforts so far? What do you make of all that?
DOGE has been off to a rocky start. That's the nicest way I can say it. At this point, it seems like Elon Musk and his band of Silicon Valley budget cutters are dramatically out of their depth. They don't seem to understand the federal budget. They don't seem to understand federal accounting. They're making enormous mistakes, creating enormous chaos, breaking so many laws, and ultimately creating chaos for government employees, for government contractors, for recipients of government spending, all while saving virtually no money.
Now, DOGE, of course, is claiming to have already found $65 billion in savings. Is there any credibility to that claim, that figure at all?
A deep dive into the actual wall of receipts for their $65 billion reveals that it's actually closer to $2 billion. First, they only listed about $16 billion, and they made enormous mathematical errors. For instance, when they canceled an $8 million grant, they misstated it as $8 billion. That's an $8 billion math error. So that right there cuts them down from $16 billion to $8 billion. Then from there was all sorts of misreading of government contracts, counting government contracts that had already been fulfilled or that had never been signed in the first place. In one spot, they triple counted the same contract. It's really about $2 billion they have saved, which is 1/30th of 1% of federal spending. It has actually been an embarrassing spectacle at this point.
Jessica, to be fair, DOGE has only been around for a month. They've got 17 more months to go of this. So do you think after 17 more months they might make a difference? And if so, how?
I don't see how DOGE can ultimately make a difference in federal spending because several reasons. First off, the targets they're looking at, DEI contracts, subscriptions to Politico, are symbolic cultural issues meant to excite the Republican base, but they don't actually have much money. They're what we call budget dust. So it doesn't matter how deep they go into these government contracts or these subscriptions. There's just not much money there. The real money is in 6 programs that consume 75% of federal spending. And that's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense, veterans, and interest. And those 6 are mostly off the table, according to President Trump. If you can't touch Social Security and Medicare, Republicans want to expand spending for defense and veterans. You can't directly cut interest. What's left? There's not much. But the other reason DOGE won't save a lot of money, they can't legally cut spending by very much. It is illegal for federal agencies to spend less than the amount of money Congress passed a law giving them. That's called impoundment, and it's illegal. They can move money around, but DOGE cannot unilaterally cancel spending. To do that, you need Congress to pass new legislation reducing the spending levels, and that's probably not going to happen.
Should we care whether Congress has a say in Trump's plans to reduce costs and maybe dismantle agencies? Or should we just be pleased that someone somewhere is making the hard calls just for once?
We should be very concerned because the Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse for a reason, which is that Congress is closer to the American people. They're elected more often than the president, at least in the House. They represent smaller groups and are more responsive. And honestly, if Congress isn't passing bills to do this, that suggests that the American people don't support it. If the president is eliminating departments that the American people want eliminated, then Congress should have no problem passing the bills. The fact that they can't means that the people closest don't want this. Additionally, a warning to Republicans. The powers you give Donald Trump today to run over Congress are the same powers a Democratic president is going to have the next time they win the White House. And if Donald Trump can unilaterally get rid of the Department of Education, a Democratic president can unilaterally fire all the border control agents or lay off much of our troops in the Defense Department. Be careful the power you give allies, because the other side can use that power too.
So we're hearing a lot about the shuttering of entire agencies and maybe 1 million workers being on a bubble now, according to President Trump, depending on what that means. Do you think ultimately, though, there are tangible budget savings to be made from all of these sackings?
Not much. Some. Let's put some numbers on it. If we eliminated 1/4 of all government jobs, that would be about 550,000 government jobs. It would save 1% of federal spending. Now, we're not going to eliminate 550,000 government jobs, but even then, again, it's 1% of spending. Now, I'm a conservative. I'm a free market person. If there are government employees who are redundant in their work, who aren't doing a good job, who are in agencies that we no longer need, I absolutely agree that we should shed those jobs and reduce the number of federal employees. But ultimately, that's not where the money is. The money is in the actual benefits that go out the door. The money is in the actual weapon systems, the veterans benefits. You can only save so much from cutting government employment.
Jessica Riedl, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
As we reported on previous shows, Donald Trump moved quickly on his election promise to crack down on illegal immigration. And one industry in particular stands to see a major windfall as the mass deportation plans fall into place: private, for-profit prisons. With more on that, here's Melina Wicks in the briefing room.
One of Trump's first executive orders as president was undoing 78 of Biden's executive orders.
Why don't you say what I'm signing?
Sure. The first item that President Trump is signing is the rescission of 78 Biden-era executive actions.
One thing on Trump's hit list was Biden's order to end the use of private prisons. which had restored a policy from the Obama administration, which the first Trump administration rescinded back in 2017. The private prison industry has more ups and downs than Robert Downey Jr., but now it's back on top.
After Trump's win, GO CEO George Zoley enthused in a November earnings call that the president-elect's immigration stance presented a, quote, unprecedented opportunity, and said the business was looking at a, quote, potential doubling of all of our services.
Ideally, they would sound a little less ecstatic about locking people up, but are private prisons any different from public ones? One of the supposed benefits is they're cheaper, because the private sector comes up with more innovations. Like what, I wonder?
A 2016 study by the Brookings Institution found those savings are achieved primarily by hiring fewer correctional officers and paying them less.
See, I never would have thought of that. But there's not a lot of evidence that actually supports the idea they're cheaper. Prisons can have very different populations depending on the level of security and type of inmates. So doing like-for-like comparisons is hard. And private prisons often refuse to take people with more complex and expensive medical needs, which can make savings seem bigger. That's the cost. But what about the quality? The Obama administration first moved to phase out private prisons off the back of a supposedly damning Department of Justice investigation, suggesting private prisons are more dangerous. But the report itself was more ambiguous. They found that in 8 key areas, private prisons were worse in 6 of them, including reports of incidents, lockdowns, and inmate discipline, while private prisons were better when it came to passing drug tests and sexual misconduct. And while the report suggested private prisons were worse on selected grievances, they found inmates in private prisons filed fewer grievances overall. But let's say Democrats are right and private prisons are bad. In that case, it would really be a problem that despite a theoretical ban, the federal government's use of private prisons actually increased under Biden. That's because he only banned their use by the Department of Justice, and not their use by ICE, who detain undocumented immigrants. By the end of Biden's term, private prisons house nearly 9,000 more federal detainees than at the start of his term. It's especially galling as Biden framed the executive order as a move for racial justice.
This is the first step to stop corporation from profiting off of incarceration that is less humane and less safe, as the studies show.
Asterisk, only if you're a citizen. Not only did Biden seem to think immigrants deserved a worse form of detention, the restriction on the use of private prisons, while massively increasing the number of immigrants in detention, led to overcrowding, making prison life worse for everyone. We don't know if private prisons are better or worse than public ones. But there's one thing we can say for sure. You can't call it a comeback when they never really went away.
Ever since his very first run for president, Donald Trump has waged a running battle with certain members of the press corps.
That's enough. That's enough.
Mr. President,
That's
I was
enough.
going to ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr.
Excuse
President.
me. That's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other
Peter,
question,
let's
if
go.
I may ask.
Do you mind?
I would like for you to answer the question.
Okay, it's very simple to answer.
That's why I asked it.
It's very simple to. You're a nasty person, I'll tell you what. She's shocked that I picked her. She's like in a state of shock.
I'm not thinking, Mr.
That's
President.
okay. I know you're not thinking. You never do.
I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
But now the White House is moving to limit not only which journalists get to ask the president questions, but who can even cover major events as a part of the travelling press pool. Until now, the White House Correspondents Association decided which outlets would be in the pool for particular events. They would then create stories that other outlets can draw on as well. This all follows a decision to make room in the White House press briefing room for some new media outlets, including some podcasters, even a representative of the election-denying My Pillow guy, Mike Lindell's Lindell TV, whatever that is. At the same time, the global news agency, the Associated Press, has been shut out of the Oval Office for refusing to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America after Trump renamed it, because AP point out that that renaming is only recognised in America and they're a global outfit.
Indeed, and the AP took the White House to court about that very issue because there is a pretty clear legal precedent of the White House not being able to punish reporters for their speech, or in fact the outlets they belong to. Jim Acosta, for example, in that stoush he played before, he was excluded from the press pool after that, and a court overturned that particular banning. Well, this week the court refused to place a temporary restraining order on the White House while the trial was going on. The judge said he wasn't persuaded that the AP was facing irreparable harm as a result of the ban, which is a condition for a restraining order, and they could get access to the same information from the pool notes that any member of the White House Correspondents Association can get, even if they are banned from the press room. Now, in my view, that's quite reasonable. The trial is going to take place in a couple of weeks. We can wait. They don't need an injunction for the next 2 weeks. But Trump acted like he'd won the whole case.
As you know, we won that lawsuit right there. See the Gulf of America, which is a beautiful name. Most people agree. I don't know. It's, AP has been terrible. Look, I think they're radical left. I think they're third-rate reporters. I know the specific young lady that works on the account is terrible.
Actually, despite being a Trump-appointed judge, the judge hinted exactly the opposite of what Trump suggested there. He warned White House officials that case law over press access does not weigh in their favour. In fact, he said it was uniformly unhelpful to the White House, and he suggested they may want to consider changes to their position against the AP. In particular, the judge said that a key part of the evidence that the White House was punishing the AP for their free speech is that normally, as you say, the White House accepts the White House Correspondents Association to be the referee of which reporters get in the press pool. So the judge was saying that was why Trump was going to lose the case. So I think a critical reason for why the White House is stopping the White House Correspondents Association from deciding who gets to be in the press pool is because they're trying to win the case against the AP. I think it's a legal strategy.
Yeah, it is. And it's a debatable question about just how much it matters to be able to ask Donald Trump questions, to be travelling with him to factories or foreign countries or whatever it might be. Although we did see a good example earlier today in the White House where Trump is there with the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and Trump is asked about the AUKUS treaty. And Trump, it seemed, either didn't hear or didn't remember what the AUKUS treaty was all about. Now, that wasn't set out to be a gotcha question from the journalist. It was a very reasonable question to ask, given it's the British Prime Minister right there. But it's the kind of thing that Trump and the people around him want to avoid, because somebody from Newsmax or Fox News are not going to be asking him questions about AUKUS.
That's absolutely true. I think it's one of those ones where the actual banning itself, the action doesn't make much realistic difference, but it's just what it symbolises. It symbolises the end of the independence of the media in the White House, and that's what I think people are concerned about.
Yeah, the other media story as well that we wanted to touch on before we bring our guest in is Jeff Bezos, Amazon founder, has owned the Washington Post for a number of years now, and this was seen as, for a long time, a very good thing that he was putting all this money into the Washington Post, basically saving this grand and glorious masthead from demise. But this week, Jeff Bezos basically announced that the op-ed pages are now going to exclude a diversity of opinion and just focus on essentially free market principles. And some people are concerned not only that does this exclude a range of other opinions, counter opinions from the opinion pages, but this could leach into news coverage and that we're going to see a much more conservative version of the Washington Post emerge.
Yeah, look, to be clear, he said the topics he was interested in were personal liberties and free markets. And he did say there'll be other topics, but what that suggests is that they won't, as you say, have opposition. So in particular, I don't think there's a lot of people arguing against personal liberties, but free markets, yeah, there are. There are people arguing against free markets. And so you'd expect not many non-free market articles in the Washington Post as a result. Now, look, I don't think that's necessarily a Republican thing. Like, people are suggesting that he's trying to suck up to Donald Trump by doing that. Like, I do a lot of reading, and I can tell you the most effective critics of Donald Trump out of the outlets that I read is Reason Magazine, which is a libertarian magazine, which is all about personal liberties and free markets. It's not necessarily pro-Republican to believe in that. I also think that the op-ed pages, they're the swill of the newspaper. What we care about is the news. Right. And as you say, if this leaks into the news, we've got a problem. But I just want to just make clear to people, you can have an active, respectable news division and a terrible op-ed section. The Wall Street Journal has one of the most, if not the most, respected news division in the American press, and has the least respected op-ed section in the American press. So you can keep a wall between those two sections, but the question is that wall going to take place? So once again, is this representative of a creeping interference with the news division?
Well, that church and state kind of division, it may work at the Wall Street Journal. Highly debatable that even under the same owner, it worked at Fox News. You know, yes, they did try and section off their news programs from their opinion programs, but it all kind of became this one melange and pretty ideologically consistent. But for more on all of this, we're joined by Bill Grueskin. He has spent decades as a senior journalist and editor at some of America's most influential publications, including the Wall Street Journal. He's now a professor at the Columbia Journalism School in New York. Bill, welcome to Planet America. I wonder, in your opinion, how concerned should we be about the White House picking and choosing the pool reporters that are going to cover the president from now on? Is this, in your view, a big deal?
Yes, it is a big deal, and in ways that may not be immediately apparent to a lot of Americans, because they probably figure, well, look, Trump can talk to whoever he wants to. So how is this any different? But for many years, an organization called the White House Correspondents Association has, with the agreement of previous presidents, both Republican and Democratic, has determined who's going to be in the pool. And they've been very careful to have a mix of conservative, moderate, liberal outlets being represented there. Suddenly, Trump wants to take it over, and not simply take it over, but turn over a lot of those slots to right-wing news organizations that really have, let's just say, not the same standards as an organization like the Associated Press or the Washington Post, or an organization like that.
Bill, I suppose a cynic would counter that, look, it doesn't really matter who's travelling around with Trump, because he only calls upon the reporters he either wants the questions from or wants to spar with and then abuse for his own sport.
Right.
Ultimately, does it make a practical difference beyond that principle?
I think at this point is probably okay, because Trump's popularity, it's not great, but it isn't terrible. And compared to where he was at the end of his first term, it's actually decent. So I think right now he's willing to take questions from outlets that he might view as being more antagonistic, as well as those that are more favorable. But if things start going in the wrong direction, and there are signs, whether they're signs involving the economy, national security, the downsizing of the government, if things start going badly, you can imagine a situation where Trump only wants to be asked questions by those outlets that he knows are going to kowtow to his very whims. And then you really do have a problem with transparency.
There is this argument that the White House has referred to, and you have referred to, about the legacy media not being the entire media these days. There is the new media as well. Let's forget what the White House has just done. How do you think the new media would best be accommodated in a productive way?
I think the way I would go about it is try to expand the membership of the White House Correspondents Association. I've looked at their membership roster in the last few weeks, so maybe they've already done it, but expand it, make sure that it's broadly representative, both of various political viewpoints, but also various media. You still want to ensure that you have real journalists there, not just people spouting off opinions who never actually pick up the telephone or send an email to actually find out what's going on. But I think expanding the pool of outlets in the White House Correspondents would be a legitimate thing to do. And then maybe you take from a broader pool.
If we could turn to the Washington Post story, where Jeff Bezos has declared that he would like the op-ed page to be focusing on, I believe, personal liberties and free markets. Some might say every newspaper has a point of view. Isn't it good for the owner to be upfront about what their point of view is?
Yeah, so what's happened at the Washington Post is really quite an amazing but also a very troubling story. A number of years ago, Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post. At that point, the Washington Post was in a lot of trouble. It was shrinking. They were doing a lot of layoffs. He poured a lot of money into it, and he hired one of the best editors in American journalism, Marty Barron, to run the newsroom. And by all accounts, Bezos was very supportive of great journalism. He never tried to sway the coverage. And in terms of the editorial page, he also had kind of a hands-off attitude. Clearly, something happened, in June or July when it became apparent that Biden was in trouble, the Democrats were in trouble, that Trump was going to be nominated, and Trump was in a surprisingly strong position to get reelected. And Bezos did what, unfortunately, a number of powerful people in this country have done. They started cutting deals, either direct deals with Trump or basically kind of a hidden quid pro quo where they would do something, they would know Trump would see it, and by doing that, they would hope to get better treatment from Trump. So, right before the election, Bezos decided we aren't going to endorse a political candidate, even though the Washington Post editorial page was all set to endorse him. Now he's come out with this attitude that they're going to have really a much more conservative bent towards their editorial page. And he isn't even saying maybe we need a better balance between liberal and conservative voices. What he's saying is, I want us to be more conservative. And I think that is somewhat troubling. I mean, it's true. Owners get to determine the opinion slant of a newsroom. I worked at the Wall Street Journal for many years. It had a very conservative edit page before it got bought by Rupert Murdoch. It has a very conservative editorial page now. And those of us on the news side did our work unimpeded, and it was fine. So we can sit here and hope that Bezos's attitude toward the opinion page won't bleed into the news pages. But so far, Bezos isn't showing a lot of understanding about how good journalism gets done, and it's very disappointing.
I wonder, though, Bill, is there any evidence to suggest that media proprietors, they've got a long track record of basically throwing their money on the horse as it's barreling towards the finish line, not necessarily affecting the outcome, but just putting their chips on the winner. If the editorial page suddenly becomes more conservative, are there going to be many undecided voters who turn to the Washington Post and go, free market, that's clearly the way of the future?
Yeah, probably not. I mean, I think, a really good editorial page isn't known so much for its, what we call in the United States, house editorials, those that are generally unsigned and represent the institutional view. What you really want are great op-ed writers, as we call them here, people who write columns that have a point of view, often have a lot of reporting and analysis. They give you a lot of insight into something going on, whether it's in foreign affairs or domestic affairs or cultural affairs. And that is really where most great editorial pages have made their marks in recent years. The New York Times has certainly done a lot to bolster its op-ed stable. And the Washington Post for many years has had a very good range of conservative and liberal voices. Now, I think the concern is not just that the House editorials are going to get more conservative, but that those op-ed writers who represent more progressive, liberal, Democratic Party leaning voices are going to get eased out, or maybe they'll be fired, or maybe they'll just quit. And suddenly it'll become kind of a monochrome editorial page that spouts only conservative points of view. And I think that is a concern. Obviously, the bigger concern is if that bleeds into the news coverage. If the people running the news side start getting the message that they have to tone down their coverage of Trump or the Republican congressmen and senators. So far, we haven't seen that in the Washington Post, and let's just hope that stays the same.
Well, Bill Grueskin, thank you for joining us for a fascinating conversation. Appreciate you taking the time for us.
Of course, anytime.
Now, before we go this week, I wanted to mention the passing of Clint Hill at the age of 93. Now, the name Clint Hill may not be too familiar to you, but chances are you have seen him many times. He was the Secret Service agent assigned to protect First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. Hill was on the running board of the Secret Service vehicle immediately behind the presidential limousine when the first shot was fired, and he ran to the back of the president's car As he did so, the fatal shot hit President Kennedy just as Hill was scrambling onto the back of the vehicle and pushing the First Lady back into her seat. And he then tried to shield both of the Kennedys as the vehicle then sped toward Parkland Hospital. It all happened within just a few seconds, but Clint Hill blamed himself for not responding even more quickly. He believed that he should have taken what turned out to be the fatal bullet and saved the president's life. Hill stayed in the Secret Service for another 12 years. He rose to become a deputy director of the service, but he was clearly deeply, deeply traumatised by what happened. As you can see in this clip from a remarkable 1975 interview he conducted with Mike Wallace for America's 60 Minutes.
You couldn't have gotten there. You surely don't have any sense of guilt about that.
Yes, I certainly do. I have a great deal of guilt about that. Had I turned in a different direction, I'd have made it. It's my fault.
Oh. No one has ever suggested that for an instant. All that you did was show great bravery and great presence of mind. What was on the citation that was given you? For your work on November 22nd, 1963, extraordinary courage and heroic effort in the face of maximum danger.
Mike, I don't care about that. If I had reacted just a little bit quicker, and I could have, I guess. And I'll live with that to my grave.
That grave took another half a century for Hill to reach, despite his obvious distress there. He later said that interview with Wallace was cathartic for him. He began to forgive himself after that moment, but the memories of that day, of course, stayed with him for the rest of his life. The US House of Representatives, meanwhile, has recently announced a task force to look into a range of government secrets and to make the files on them fully public, starting with the Kennedy assassination. It's going to be headed by Florida Republican Anna Paulina Luna.
And I can tell you, based on what I've been seeing so far, the initial hearing that was actually held here in Congress was actually faulty in the single bullet theory. I believe that there were two shooters, and we should be finding more information as we are able to gain access into the SCIF, hopefully before the files are actually released to the public.
By which presumably she means the single gun theory. Nobody is out there saying there was a single bullet involved, at least I hope they're not. But Representative Luna is going to have her work cut out for her, getting the kind of first-hand evidence she wants to see.
Based on what we're actually looking to do with the JFK investigation, I'm looking to actually bring in some of the attending physicians at the initial assassination, and then also people that had been on the various commissions looking into, like the Warren Commission looking into the initial assassinations. There's been conflicting evidence, and I think that even the FBI at the time reported some anomalies in the initial autopsy at Bethesda, Maryland. All of those, though, seem to have been rinsed and repeated in the media to push a certain narrative that we don't agree with. And so I think that in order to put to bed some of the theories that have been out there on John F. Kennedy, we have to know the full truth, and the full truth starts with transparency, and that's why these files is so important for the American people to read for themselves.
Nice idea. Trouble with that, of course, is that all the members of the Warren Commission are long since dead. I know, it sounds like a conspiracy. In 1979, there was a Congressional Select Committee that rejected the Warren Commission's lone gunman theory. They concluded there was a high probability that two gunmen fired at President Kennedy. And Dr. Robert McClelland, who was the surgeon at Parkland Hospital, who tried to save Kennedy's life, he believed that the fatal shot came from in front of Kennedy, from the grassy knoll, not from behind where Oswald was in the book depository building. McClelland also came to believe that Kennedy's death had resulted from a conspiracy, but he died 6 years ago as well. So Clint Hill was the last survivor from the Kennedy motorcade. He never believed in any of those conspiracy theories, by the way. He supported the Warren Commission finding that Lee Harvey Oswald was the only shooter. He fired 3 shots, including one that missed and the one that Clint Hill wished that he could have taken for the President of the United States. So we'll see if we get any answers out of this Congress, Chaz.
I have one thing to say, John. $1.6 trillion is your deficit. Keep your eyes on the prize. Forget the shiny objects and the assassinations from 60 years ago where everyone's dead. worry about the deficit.
Yeah, good luck with that. That's it for this weekend edition of Planet America. We'll be back next Wednesday night on ABC TV at around 9:40 and anytime you like from 9 p.m. on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook.
And we're going to be right back here on ABC News at the same time next week as well. We'll see you there.
Bye-bye.